My name is Olivia. What I'm about to tell you is something I never thought I'd ever experience. A temptation that tested the boundaries of love, trust, and responsibility. It all started one quiet, ordinary morning in our home. Our house was modest but full of warmth, nestled on the outskirts of a sleepy beach town in California. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was a constant melody that kept us grounded. My husband, Michael, had left for a business trip early that morning, leaving me to face the quiet alone. His absence was always felt, like a lingering emptiness that no amount of cleaning or tidying could fill. I decided to take advantage of the solitude, so I set the house in order. The sun filtered through the large windows, casting a golden glow on everything, and I let my favorite jazz playlist fill the space. The atmosphere was peaceful, the kind of calm that made the world outside seem distant, unimportant. As I dusted off the shelves, I found myself pausing to adjust a picture frame. That's when I felt it, an unmistakable sense that I wasn't alone. Turning around, I saw Ethan standing there, his messy hair and sleepy eyes betraying the fact that he'd just woken up. Ethan was Michael's son from his first marriage, and though we'd been living together for over a year, there were moments when it still felt awkward between us. "Good morning, Olivia," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. "Morning, Ethan," I replied, trying to keep my tone light and casual. My heart raced for reasons I couldn't explain. Ethan walked in, settling onto the couch with a slight hesitance. He seemed to be observing me more than usual, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Maybe it was the way his eyes lingered a moment longer than they should have. Or perhaps it was the silence that followed. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't quite natural either. We began talking casually about his internship, the kind of small talk that could easily fill the empty space between two people who barely knew each other. It seemed innocent at first. He spoke about the projects he was looking forward to, how he was eager to apply what he'd learned at university in a real-world setting. He sounded excited, and it was easy for me to listen, smile, and nod along as if nothing was happening. But there was a weight in the air, something not immediately visible, but it lingered, making everything feel slightly off. The space between us had started to feel charged, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. I tried to push the unease aside, distracting myself with the task at hand. As I climbed onto the stool to adjust the picture frame on the high shelf, I realized my mind wasn't entirely focused on what I was doing. My foot slipped, and before I could correct my balance, I felt myself tumbling forward. A flash of panic gripped me for a split second, my heart skipping a beat as I imagined crashing to the floor. But before I could even brace myself, I felt a firm grip on my waist. Ethan's strong arms wrapped around me in a reflexive motion, pulling me against him with surprising strength. His hands were steady, unwavering, as though he had done this 1,000 times before. His arms felt warm against my skin, and the suddenness of his touch startled me. My breath caught, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The world outside seemed to blur into the background, and all I could feel was the press of his body against mine, his arms around me, holding me in place. "Olivia!" he shouted, his voice sharp and urgent, though his hands were gentle as they steadied me. I didn't know if it was the fear of falling or the intimacy of the moment, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I could feel the warmth of his breath against my ear, the tension in his muscles as he held me securely. It was as if time had slowed down and the space between us had evaporated completely. I did my best to calm myself, forcing a laugh to break the tension. "Good thing you were here, huh?" I said, trying to make light of the situation, though my voice trembled, betraying the storm of emotions that were suddenly swirling inside me. Ethan didn't laugh, and for a long moment, his gaze lingered on me. His eyes didn't move from mine. There was something in them. Something deeper than just concern or admiration. It was a look I couldn't place, but it felt different, intimate, like he was seeing me in a way I wasn't used to. A flicker of confusion passed through me, followed by something else I wasn't prepared to acknowledge. We stood there, frozen in that space, neither of us moving. I felt his breath, quick and shallow, brushing against my cheek. I tried to step back to regain my composure, but I couldn't. The world outside seemed to fade away completely. The sunlight pouring through the window, the faint sound of the waves crashing outside. It all became secondary. All that mattered was the feeling of his hands on my waist, his body so close to mine, and the undeniable tension that crackled between us. Finally, I managed to break the silence. I didn't want to dwell on what had just happened. I needed to create distance, to regain some semblance of normalcy. Do you have any plans for the weekend? I asked, the question tumbling out without thought. I hoped it would steer the conversation away from the electric pull I could feel between us. Ethan shrugged, his gaze still intense as it held mine. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at his lips. Not really. I'll probably just relax around here. His words were calm, but there was a certain weight to them. A quiet sincerity that left me wondering if there was more he wasn't saying. I nodded, my mind racing. I didn't trust my own thoughts anymore. Every inch of me felt pulled in 1,000 directions. None of them leading to a place I was comfortable with. I needed to create space to breathe. I excused myself, stepping toward the sofa, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I sat down, hoping that the physical distance between us would help calm my nerves. But instead of the relief I anticipated, I only felt more aware of him. It was as if the space between us had shrunk even further, drawing us closer despite the gap of the couch. The silence was palpable, hanging between us like a heavy fog. It wasn't uncomfortable, no. It wasn't that, but it was thick, filled with something I couldn't define. There was a pull I couldn't explain, and it unsettled me. I glanced at Ethan, but he wasn't looking at me in the same way anymore. He was staring out the window, his face serene. But there was something in his posture that suggested he was just as affected as I was by whatever had just happened. "These mornings are nice," I said quietly, attempting to fill the void between us. Peaceful, unhurried. I didn't know why I said it. It just felt like something needed to be said. A small attempt to normalize the growing discomfort. Ethan looked at me, his expression softening. His eyes, which had been sharp moments ago, were now full of something gentler. "Yeah, especially when there's someone to share it with." His words hit me like a wave, crashing over all the carefully constructed walls I had tried to build. I felt my pulse quicken, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just a casual statement. It wasn't just an offhand remark. It was laden with meaning, and I felt it deeply. Every word seemed to resonate within me, stirring something I hadn't been prepared to feel. Before I could respond, Ethan added, almost hesitantly, "Sometimes it feels like we understand each other without saying anything at all." The weight of his words hung in the air, thick and unspoken. My heart stuttered in my chest, my breath shallow. I couldn't tell if he was speaking about the connection between us, about this strange, unspoken understanding, or if he was just being kind, trying to break the tension. But either way, I couldn't ignore the way his words stirred something inside me, something raw and vulnerable. I reached out, my hand shaking slightly, and brushed it against his arm. The simple touch seemed to freeze the air around us, thickening the space between us even further. My fingers lingered for a moment, my pulse racing as I realized the depth of what had just happened. It wasn't just the touch. It was the fact that I couldn't pull my hand away. I didn't want to. His gaze softened as he met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in him that mirrored my own confusion, my own conflict. It was the same look I had been trying to deny within myself, the undeniable pull, the charge that was too strong to ignore. But neither of us moved. We both sat there, still, as if the world outside didn't exist anymore. As if we were caught in a moment too powerful to escape. Everything in me screamed that this was wrong, that this moment wasn't supposed to happen. But my body, my mind, and my heart, they were all betraying me. Ethan's presence, his closeness, was overwhelming. It was intoxicating, and I couldn't help but want more. The moment hung in the air like a question with no answer. And neither of us had the courage to say it aloud. I could feel Ethan's gaze on me, steady and unwavering, as I tried to regain some semblance of control over my racing heart. The world around me seemed to fade into a soft blur, like I was looking at it through the fog window of my own thoughts. Every breath I took felt too shallow, my chest constricting with a mixture of fear and longing. The room was silent except for the rhythmic sound of the ocean outside, but even that seemed distant now, like a forgotten echo from another place. All I could hear, all I could feel, was Ethan. And the undeniable connection between us that I had tried so desperately to ignore. His eyes held mine, intense and searching, as if he were looking for something I couldn't give him, but desperately wanted to. I felt the weight of his stare, and it made the air between us heavy, charged with something both frightening and exhilarating. I could sense the same tension in his body, the same battle between restraint and desire. It was like we were caught in a delicate standoff, each of us holding back, yet knowing that something had already shifted between us. It was impossible to deny it any longer. My breath hitched as I felt his presence inching closer to mine, like the pull of gravity, inevitable, unstoppable. The space between us diminished in a way that made my pulse race even faster. I could feel the heat of his body radiating towards me. Could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the salt of the sea air. The warmth was enveloping, intoxicating. And before I could stop myself, before my thoughts could catch up to my actions, Ethan leaned in. His lips were mere inches from mine, and I felt my heart leap into my throat. I didn't move away. I didn't stop him. Instead, I did the one thing I should never have done. I leaned in too. Time seemed to slow down in that moment. The outside world, everything I knew, everything I had ever lived for, faded into a blur. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore, the golden light flooding through the window, all of it became background noise to the single, overwhelming reality that was Ethan's lips nearing mine. It was as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. And then his lips met mine. The kiss wasn't fast or frantic. It wasn't desperate, though my heart felt like it was about to burst with the intensity of it. It was soft at first, gentle. Like a quiet confession of something that neither of us had the courage to say aloud. His lips were warm, tender, as though he was afraid to go too far. Afraid that even this small contact might be more than we could handle. But I didn't pull away. Instead, I let myself sink into the kiss, feeling the softness of his lips against mine. The tender pressure that made my pulse spike. Every nerve in my body seemed to come alive, as if every part of me was suddenly aware of the enormity of the moment. I closed my eyes, my hands trembling at my sides as I tried to anchor myself in the whirlwind of feelings crashing through me. My breath quickened and my heart thudded in my chest. So loud I could feel it in my throat. I could hear the rush of blood in my ears, drowning out everything else. The world outside didn't matter anymore. There was no one else but him. No one else but this kiss. This was wrong. I knew it. I knew that every part of me should have been shouting to stop, to pull away and walk out of that room. This was a boundary I shouldn't have crossed, a line that once crossed could never be uncrossed. But in that moment my reason abandoned me, drowned beneath the tide of emotions that threatened to consume me. I couldn't pull away. I didn't want to. His hand, warm and steady, slid to my cheek. His fingers brushing over my skin with the lightest touch, as if he were afraid that even the smallest movement might break the fragile thread of connection between us. His touch was gentle, yet insistent, pulling me closer, urging me to come into him, to lose myself in this moment with him. I felt his warmth flood through me, and I realized that for all the time I had spent holding myself back, for all the walls I had built around my heart, they were crumbling in an instant. With every brush of his hand against my face, with every shift of his body closer to mine, those walls dissolved, piece by piece. And then, without thinking, without hesitation, our lips met again, this time deeper, more passionate, more urgent. The kiss was no longer just a soft meeting of lips, it was a collision of emotions, a fierce meeting of longing and need. I felt his hand slide to my back, pulling me into him with a strength that matched the intensity of the kiss. His body pressed against mine, and I felt the heartbeat of his heart against my chest, syncing with the erratic rhythm of my own. The world outside no longer existed. There was only Ethan and his touch, and the way my heart seemed to beat in time with his, as if we were two parts of a whole. Every kiss seemed to tear down the walls I had built so carefully around my heart. I had spent so long hiding behind my own fear, my own guilt, trying to deny the pull between us, trying to keep control. But with every brush of his lips against mine, with every touch of his hand, my resolve melted away, leaving only raw, unguarded emotion. I knew this wasn't supposed to happen. I knew this was dangerous, that it was a line we shouldn't be crossing. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the feeling of his body against mine, the fire that had ignited between us, the hunger in both of us that refused to be ignored. His hands moved, sliding into my hair, his fingers tangling in the strands as he tilted my head back slightly. I gasped at the sudden sensation, and his lips took advantage of the opening, deepening the kiss even further. Every part of me seemed to melt under his touch, and yet I could feel something inside me resisting, something telling me that this was wrong, that I couldn't do this, that I shouldn't be here. But it was too late. The kiss was no longer a choice, it was an inevitability. Every part of me, every nerve, every heartbeat was consumed by him. It felt like the ground beneath me had vanished. Like we were both suspended in a moment that would never end, a moment that had completely overtaken both of us. I didn't know how long we stood there. Lips locked in a kiss that felt like it was meant to last forever. Time lost all meaning. The only thing that existed was the kiss and the electric charge between us that refused to be extinguished. There was no room for doubt, no room for reason, only the feeling of Ethan and the intense longing that had built up between us for far too long. And when we finally pulled away, breathless and trembling, our faces still inches apart, I could feel the weight of the moment. His forehead rested against mine, and we both gasped for air, as if we were both coming up for the first time after being submerged in a deep, uncharted sea. The air between us crackled with the intensity of what had just transpired. I could feel his heart still racing, could feel the warmth of his body so close to mine, and yet, I knew that something had shifted forever. There was no going back from this. What had been a moment of fleeting temptation had become something far more dangerous, something that neither of us could escape. As I stared into his eyes, I realized the truth. We had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. We stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms for what felt like hours, but time itself seemed to be suspended. Like the world outside had faded into nothingness. The space between us felt infinite, as though the kiss had created an entirely new universe, one where nothing else mattered. My head rested against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat in sync with mine. The comforting thud of his heart was a strange contrast to the turmoil I could feel rising inside me. It was calm, but heavy, a reminder of everything that had just happened and everything that could never be undone. I let myself fall deeper into the warmth of his embrace, afraid that if I moved, the spell would break. But even as I held him closer, the weight of the moment pressed on me, not just the physical weight of his body against mine, but the crushing emotional weight of the line we had crossed. We both knew what we had done. And as much as I tried to hold on to the feeling of closeness, of connection, deep down I knew it couldn't be undone. That moment, that kiss, was now a part of us, etched into the very fabric of our beings. There was no escaping it. There was no turning back. But then, the front door opened. The sound of the door creaking as it swung inward hit me like a physical blow. Michael was home. "Olivia, I'm home." Michael's cheerful voice echoed through the house. And in that instant, I felt my world collapse in on itself. The bubble we had created, the fragile space where nothing existed but the two of us, shattered. It splintered into a million pieces, each one cutting through me with the sharpness of reality. The illusion we had lived in for those few minutes was gone, and I was left standing on the edge of something much darker, much more dangerous. My heart stopped. I didn't move at first. My entire body seemed to freeze, caught between the past few minutes, so full of passion, confusion, and desperation, and the present, where the weight of what I had just done came crashing down on me. The guilt hit me first, a cold, suffocating wave. Then came the fear, the overwhelming fear of what would happen next. But beneath all of that, there was something else, something more raw and difficult to admit. There was a longing, a desire, a part of me that didn't want to let go of Ethan, that didn't want to stop what had started between us. Ethan's grip on me loosened, and we pulled apart quickly, instinctively, as though the very act of separating could somehow shield us from the consequences of our actions. Our gazes met for the briefest of seconds. In those seconds I saw everything: guilt, regret, confusion, and something deeper, something more dangerous. Longing. A longing that neither of us dared to acknowledge. Neither of us spoke, but it didn't matter. The silence between us was louder than any words could have been. Michael's footsteps echoed through the hallway, getting closer, oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded. I felt my hands trembling, betraying the calm exterior I tried so desperately to maintain. Every part of me wanted to run, to hide, to somehow erase the last few moments, but I couldn't. I couldn't escape it, not now. Not when the consequences of what I had done were standing just feet away from me. Michael entered the room, his face lighting up with the same warm smile I had seen 1,000 times before. It was the smile of the man I had married, the man I had built a life with. "Missed you, Olivia," he said, his voice warm and casual as if nothing had changed. His arms wrapped around me in a familiar embrace, but I could feel the difference, the coldness that had settled deep in my bones. The guilt weighed down on me like a stone, but I smiled, trying to push everything I felt aside, trying to appear normal, to act like nothing had happened. But my hands shook in his embrace. betraying the calm I tried to project. "Hey, babe," I said, my voice coming out far too light, too forced. It felt like an echo of the words I had always said. But there was no real connection behind them anymore. My heart was still racing, and my mind was a blur of thoughts I couldn't process fast enough. Ethan stood a few feet away, his eyes dark with regret. His face was tense, his shoulders tight with something I couldn't quite name. He couldn't look at me, not really. His gaze was locked on the floor, and every movement he made seemed deliberate, as if he was trying to distance himself from the storm that was brewing between us. I couldn't look at him either. I couldn't bear to meet his eyes. Not now. Not when everything had changed, when I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. The space between us felt impossibly small. Despite the physical distance that now separated us, it felt like I was standing on the edge of something. Something dangerous, something I had no idea how to control. I couldn't even look at Ethan without feeling the weight of my own betrayal. And every time I glanced at Michael, I saw his face, smiling unaware, and that made the guilt burn even deeper. I had just crossed a line that should never have been crossed. And in that moment, the world around me seemed to shift, to spin. What had started as a fleeting, almost innocent moment of connection had turned into something irreversible, something that had altered everything. The look in Ethan's eyes, the softness of his touch, the desperation in that kiss, it was all still there, lingering in the air between us, even though Michael was now holding me. "How was your trip?" I heard Michael ask, his voice warm, completely unaware of the tension that was suffocating the room. I nodded, unable to speak, afraid that my voice would give me away, afraid that the weight of the situation would show in my words. I wanted to tell him, to confess everything, to relieve myself of the guilt that was threatening to suffocate me. But I couldn't. I couldn't ruin everything. Not when Michael was looking at me like that with those warm, trusting eyes. Ethan stood in silence, his back turned toward me, staring out the window, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His silence was enough. It was the silence of regret, of realization, of something we both knew but weren't yet ready to face. I could feel the weight of Ethan's gaze on me, even from across the room. I could feel the unspoken tension that crackled in the space between us. It was suffocating. It was impossible to ignore. And yet I had to. I had to pretend that everything was fine, that nothing had changed. I had to smile, to laugh, to act as if I was still the person I had been just hours ago. But deep down, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The line had been crossed, and now there was no going back. The days that followed felt like a blur, a chaotic swirl of ordinary moments that seemed to mock the enormity of what had happened. Michael and I continued with our routines as though nothing had changed, but I could feel the change in the air. It was suffocating, oppressive. Every time I spoke to him, every time I touched him, there was a tension, unspoken but so tangible, so real that neither of us acknowledged aloud. It was there, hanging between us like a shadow that stretched further with each passing day. The tension in the house was unbearable. We moved around each other like strangers who once shared a life, but now had nothing to say. Michael remained blissfully unaware, going about his work, his usual cheerfulness masking the storm that raged inside me. And then there was Ethan. Every glance from him, every accidental brush of our arms, felt like an unspoken question. A silent plea for something neither of us dared to give into. It was as if we were two people caught in a current, unable to swim to safety, but unwilling to let go of the pull that brought us together. One afternoon, when Michael went out with friends, I found myself alone in the backyard, watering the plants. The sun beat down on me, a scorching reminder of everything that had gone wrong, everything I had allowed to happen. I couldn't escape the storm inside me. It raged with intensity, with guilt, with a longing that I knew had no place in the life I had built. I tried to focus on the task at hand, on the plants, on the simple act of nurturing life, but everything felt like a metaphor. The plants were thriving, but I felt like I was withering inside, like I was being slowly choked by the weight of my own choices. That's when Ethan appeared. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, a few feet away, his presence looming over me like a force I couldn't escape. I could feel the pull of him without even looking at him. It was a strange sensation. The way his energy filled the space between us, making the air thick and heavy. Finally he spoke, his voice low, urgent. "You're avoiding me," he said, his words slicing through the silence like a sharp blade. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say, nothing I could say. My grip on the garden hose tightened, my knuckles turning white as I fought to maintain control. His words had hit a nerve, had brought everything to the surface again, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold it together. The air around us seemed to crackle, the tension palpable. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I refused to look at him. His presence was like a magnet, pulling me in despite everything. He took a step closer. I could hear his breath in the quiet, the sound of it steady but quickening as he closed the distance between us. "I can't pretend this didn't happen," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't stop thinking about you." His words landed like a blow, each one sinking deeper into my chest, piercing through the fragile resolve I had been trying to maintain. I could feel the flood of emotion rising inside me, threatening to overwhelm me. Part of me wanted to break down, to admit everything, to let the weight of it all crash over me. But another part of me knew better. Another part of me knew that giving in to this, giving in to him, would destroy everything. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to hold it together, trying to force myself to breathe, to think clearly. But it was hard. So hard. I turned to face him, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to look into his eyes. What I saw there nearly shattered me. Regret, desire, and something else, something darker, something more desperate. It was the same look I had seen in the mirror so many times, the same mix of emotions I had been carrying with me, and I couldn't bear it. I knew what had to be done. I knew I couldn't keep living in this limbo, this in-between place where nothing was real and everything was a lie. "If you care about this family, if you care about your father," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "we need to let this go." My words felt heavy, like stones sinking into a deep, dark ocean. I could barely bring myself to say them, but I knew I had no choice. I knew that if we didn't stop this, if we didn't let it go, everything would fall apart. He nodded, his eyes heavy with regret, his face drawn in sorrow. "I know," he said softly, his voice almost breaking. It was all he could say. It was all I could say. There were no more words, no more explanations, just the quiet acceptance of the truth. And that was it. The decision was made. It wasn't easy, not by any means. But it was necessary. It was the only way to protect everything we had left. It was the only way to protect the life I had built, the family I had worked so hard to create. A week later, Ethan left for New York. He was excited about his internship, and part of me wanted to be happy for him. Wanted to see him take this opportunity, to see him succeed. But as I watched him pack his things, as I saw the hope in his eyes, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. We had been so close to something that felt real, something that could have been everything, but now it was over. When he hugged me goodbye, I could feel the weight of the moment, the finality of it. There was an ache in my chest that I couldn't ignore, a raw, painful feeling that wouldn't go away. But even as I stood there, holding him for what felt like the last time, I knew we were both leaving behind something that couldn't be reclaimed. We were both walking away from a part of ourselves that would never be the same. The ache in my chest was real, undeniable. It was the ache of loss, of regret, and of the knowledge that I had made the right choice, but it still hurt. It still burned. As I walked back inside to Michael, I tried to shake off the heaviness that lingered in the air. Life moved on. It always did. And I moved with it, carrying the weight of what had been, but also the resolve to protect the life I had built. I knew I had made the right choice, but that didn't make it any easier. I knew I would carry the consequences of my actions with me for a long time. But as I looked at Michael, smiling and unaware, I knew I had to find a way to move forward. For him. For us. For the family we had built. And so I made a silent vow to myself. No matter what, I would protect this family. I would protect the life I had created. And I would never let myself cross that line again.